The tent flap whipped violently in the wind, rhythmically slapping against the wooden poles. Brutus stood by the central table, his eyes tracing the ink lines on the map of Philippi. He did not look up when the entrance parted. Lucilius stepped inside, his movements heavy and precise. Brutus did not wait for a report. "Tell me," he demanded, his voice barely rising above the gale outside. "How did Cassius receive you?" Lucilius hesitated. He shifted his weight, his boots grinding against the dirt floor. "With courtesy, sir, but the warmth is gone." Brutus gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles whitening under the pressure. A friendship that relies on etiquette is a dying fire. The silence that followed was brittle, broken only by the rhythmic pacing of centuries. Brutus turned away, his jaw set. Moments later, the heavy, deliberate tread of boots announced the arrival of Cassius. The air grew thick with unspoken accusations. Cassius did not wait for an invitation. He slammed his hand onto the table, the map fluttering under the force of the impact. His face was flushed, the veins in his neck standing out. "You shamed my officer for taking bribes, Brutus. You ignored my pleas." Brutus stood his ground, his posture rigid. "I hold our cause to a higher standard. We killed Caesar to purge corruption, not to replace it with our own greed." The words hit the air like stones. Cassius recoiled, his breathing ragged. The argument spiraled, voices rising until they echoed against the canvas walls, drowning out the wind outside. Cassius reached for his side, his fingers fumbling with the hilt of his dagger. He drew the blade, his hand trembling with a violent, uncontrollable rage. He thrust the point toward his own chest, his eyes locked on Brutus. "If you hate me so, take my life. My heart is yours." Brutus did not blink. He stared at the steel, then reached out and slowly pushed the blade aside with the flat of his palm. The steel clattered onto the table. The tension snapped, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence. Brutus reached for a flask, poured 2 cups of wine, and slid one across the wood. They drank in silence. The candle flame pulsed in the draft, casting long, erratic shadows across the tent floor. Brutus stared into the light, his eyes unblinking. He did not look at Cassius when he spoke. "Portia is dead," he said. His voice was flat, devoid of tremor or inflection. She swallowed burning coals in her madness. The silence that followed was absolute, heavier than the wind outside. Cassius recoiled as if struck. The glass slipped from his fingers, hitting the table with a sharp, hollow crack before spilling dark wine across the map. He stared at the spreading stain, his mouth opening and closing without sound. The news of the war seemed to shrink into insignificance. Cassius reached out, his hand hovering over the table, then pulled it back as if the wood were burning. He looked at Brutus, searching for a crack in the mask, but found only a cold, hollow resolve. The political bickering that had defined their hour vanished, replaced by the stark, terrifying reality of their situation. Cassius slumped into his chair, his gaze fixed on the floor. They eventually agreed on the march to Philippi, but the words were spoken in whispers. The others departed, leaving the tent to the silence of the night. Brutus sat alone in the dim light, his posture slumped. He beckoned Lucius to play the lute. A soft, melancholic melody drifted through the space, lulling the nearby guards into a heavy, rhythmic breathing. Brutus watched the boy's head nod, his own eyes heavy with fatigue, the weight of the coming march pressing against his temples. Suddenly, the candle flame flickered. It did not go out. It turned a sickly, unnatural blue. The air in the tent grew frigid, turning his breath into a thin white mist. A shadow detached itself from the corner, coalescing into the translucent figure of Caesar. The ghost stood motionless, its gaze piercing through the fabric of the tent and into Brutus's soul. The apparition leaned forward, its presence filling the room. "I am your evil spirit, Brutus," the voice whispered, the sound like dry leaves skittering on stone. Brutus surged from his chair, his hand flying to the hilt of his sword. He lunged forward, the steel cutting through empty space. There was no resistance, only the cold air and the sudden, sharp scent of ozone. The blade struck nothing. The scent of ozone hung thick in the air, sharp and metallic against the stale smell of the tent. Brutus stood motionless, his sword still gripped in a white-knuckled fist. He waited for the figure to return, but the shadows remained empty. The silence of the night returned, absolute and unforgiving. He forced his lungs to expand, his breath coming in ragged, controlled bursts. He sheathed his blade with a sharp, final click. He walked to the edge of the sleeping area and shook the nearest guard by the shoulder. Brutus did not wait for him to fully wake. He strode toward the tent flap, pushing the heavy canvas aside to reveal the cold, dark horizon of the camp. His hands were steady, his mind was clear. The vision had not brought fear, but a final, chilling certainty. He signaled for the camp to stir, his resolve fixed on the inevitable march to war.